Whether it be the glamorous outfits, the impeccable accents, or the drive to kill, Villanelle has become one of the most memorable female villains in television history. Killing Eve gave us an incredibly refreshing approach to the female villain. Prior to Villanelle gracing our screens in Killing Eve, female villains were often depicted as seductresses, typically seeking revenge. However, Villanelle was something different entirely. She was funny, she was childish, utterly terrifying, glamorous, like I said, emotionally stunted, and worse, impossible to predict. She expanded what audience believed a female villain could be. Based on the books of the same name, Killing Eve is a British dramedy spy thriller starring Sandra Oh as Eve, a British intelligence investigator tasked with capturing an assassin, Villanelle, played by Jodie Comer. It's a game of cat and mouse between the two, and over time, they develop a mutual obsession for one another, and it is fantastic to watch unfold. I will say I was shipping these two from episode 1. In the past, female villains were often explained away for their actions, whether it be a jealous wife, a femme fatale seeking revenge, or simply because they're power hungry. Yet, Villanelle doesn't fit into any of these categories. She simply commits evil acts because she finds it amusing, or simply because she's bored. She never needs to justify her actions, and that is incredibly refreshing to see. Let's think about someone like Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones. She is perhaps one of the most famous female villains in TV history, and arguably one of the most hated. But when we examine the journey she goes on and the decisions she makes, it's all quite simple. Everything she does is for herself or for her children. She's incredibly strategic and political, but the driving force behind it all is her family. When we compare her to Villanelle, it is like night and day. Villanelle doesn't want power, and she doesn't care about money. She just wants to be entertained. She wants attention, and she wants to be free. If anything, she is the opposite of Cersei Lannister. Cersei is terrifying because she craves control. Villanelle is terrifying because she doesn't. If we want to delve even deeper, we could look at someone like Bellatrix Lestrange from Harry Potter. She is pure chaos, incredibly eccentric, perhaps at times like Villanelle, but she is still defined by her devotion for Voldemort. Her entire identity depends on someone else, whereas Villanelle belongs to nobody. Even when she worked for the 12, she was constantly breaking the rules. Loyal until bored, and ultimately no one can control her. Villanelle is pure chaos, but only in service to herself, and honestly, I respect her. Despite us being aware that Villanelle is the villain, we can't help but root for her, and this comes down to the incredible writing, as well as the stellar performance by Jodie Comer. From the get-go, I wanted to see Eve and Villanelle get together, as I said before, simply due to the sizzling chemistry between the pair, but also largely in part to Villanelle's charm. She's funny, playful, and incredibly charismatic. She can go from making you laugh to then taking someone's life. It's mental.
Like you shot Frank! Bang! In the head!
The unpredictability makes her scary, yet you still root for her. You find it endearing. Or at least I did. Maybe that says more about me than her. What is refreshing though is she is allowed to be silly. She wears ridiculous clothes at times. I'm specifically thinking about one pink dress, which funny enough, I actually did a photo shoot once in Toronto wearing that dress. You can find it somewhere on my Instagram. She pouts, throws tantrums, behaves at times like an overgrown child. While male villains are allowed to have their quirks and eccentricities, Villanelle felt like one of the first mainstream female villains allowed to just be weird. And oh boy, was she weird.
Thank you for making such an effort, Villanelle.
I think my favourite thing about the crafting of Villanelle is that she isn't sexualized for the audience. Villanelle is attractive, yes, but unlike classic femme fatales, her appeal isn't built around existing for the audience's gaze. The show refuses to treat her like eye candy. Instead, we learn to love her because of her personality. Her confidence, her skill set, these things drive the appeal, a very different approach from previous femme fatales. Villanelle simply wouldn't exist without Jodie Comer. She was highly praised for her performance in Killing Eve, deservedly so, and she never once played Villanelle as cold. Instead, she made her vulnerable, funny, emotionally immature, Scary, but also lost at times. And often this all took place at the same time. Perhaps my favourite moment between Villanelle and Eve, aside from when they got together and locked lips, because that was good. I was so happy. That was one of my favourite moments on television. It felt like fan service, but I absolutely loved it. But also I read the books, and they do get together in the books. Spoiler, but in the books, they run away to St. Petersburg. And then in the show, they just off one of them, don't they? But I digress. Like I was saying, perhaps one of my favourite moments between Villanelle and Eve is when Villanelle is trying to come up with an accent for an undercover mission, and within 30 seconds she cycles through Russian, British, Australian and American.
Her own like super successful bikini brand.
It became one of the most talked about scenes simply because of how effortlessly Jodie Comer did this. It also tells us something about Villanelle herself. She doesn't have a fixed identity. She's constantly performing and reinventing herself depending on who she is with. This is what makes her so unique compared to femme fatales of the past. She isn't simply one character in the story, she is many different characters and versions of herself. Just when you think you know her, she becomes someone else entirely. The thing is though, Villanelle doesn't work without Eve. Without Eve, Villanelle is simply an assassin. Without Villanelle, Eve never confronts the darkness she has spent her life suppressing. They're an unlikely pairing who work perfectly together. They're mirrors, in a sense. Villanelle spends the series becoming slightly more human, while Eve slowly becomes more comfortable with the darkness inside of herself. What's fascinating to see during their growing obsession with one another is Eve doesn't change Villanelle. If anything, Villanelle changes Eve. As I stated earlier, we can't help but root for Villanelle, which goes against our moral code. Yes, but despite all the terrible things she does, we continue to cheer, we continue to laugh, and of course, we worry when she's hurt. Of course, I won't even discuss the final episode of the series, pretending it didn't happen. I think I'm still grieving, honestly. I choose to believe the show ended when they're on the boat together and they're happy, and then they run off, like in the book, St. Petersburg. Nothing ever happens to Villanelle. They don't end up in the Thames, do they? A happy ending. But we essentially become morally compromised just as Eve does. It's quite fascinating. Unlike other villains and morally grey characters we've discussed on the channel, Villanelle isn't redeemable. She never becomes good. Yes, she and Eve finally get together in the final season, but it's not through any major character change or breakthrough. She is still the same woman, they've just both softened to one another. Not once does the show ask us to forgive Villanelle. If anything, it just asks us to understand her, and we do. Villanelle is perhaps one of the most interesting villains in television history, not because she was the first morally grey woman, but instead it's because she is allowed to be everything all at once. Everything everywhere all at once. The female villains that came before her were of course brilliantly written, but most could still be understood through their motivations. Villanelle never fit into a box. She completely shattered it. Let me know if you've watched Killing Eve. Were you rooting for Villanelle? Were you as devastated as I was during the last 10-15 minutes of season 4? And did you also pretend the ending didn't exist? Were you also one of the fans, like me, who had theories that there was going to be a secret episode that got released? I've learned just don't get your hopes up. Prepare for the worst and assume the worst is coming. Anyway, leave me a comment down below and I will see you in the next video.